Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Michael Kramer. I am the PJLA Calibration Inspection Program Manager, and I am presenting to you today for our monthly webinars on behalf of Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. We're going to look at ISO 17025 2017 requirements around section 7.1, which is review requests, tenders, and contracts. So appreciate everyone logging in. As always, this webinar is being recorded. All of the webinars that we've done over the last several years are available on our website along with the slides. So if you have interest to go back and extract or any of the past webinars, please go to the PJLA website depicted there and follow the webinar tab at the top of the menu bar. Currently, everyone is muted. You should have a question tab, however. So as we're going through this webinar, if any questions come to mind, feel free to type it into the box there. Please keep your questions related to today's topic. And then at the conclusion, give me a moment and I can go back and sort of review the questions and try to answer to the best of my ability those that were submitted. So again, once again, thank you for joining us. So review request, tenders, and contracts. So we're going to be looking at these requirements, and just looking at the title, we have three separate items specified there. Request, tenders, and contracts. So basically breaking it down a little bit here, a request is received from your laboratory end, from your client for a scope of work. The lab in response makes a tender or a proposal to the customer or client. The tender may include clarification to the scope of work, perhaps, excuse me, scheduling information, monetary compensation, etc. And then finally, we have a contract, which is the agreement between the client and the lab. So this could be as simple as a acceptance of a purchase order, or perhaps the customer agreement to a final quote. Could all suffice as that final agreement. So overall, basically these requirements specified in the standard formalizes the process of this request, tenders, and contracts and the interaction with the client. The lab is responsible to ensure that the client receives a service which meets their needs. Moreover, the laboratory must satisfy before accepting the work that they have the capabilities and resources to accept and conduct the requested work. So just in practice, this is something that any responsible lab will go through. 17025 requires it to be formalized and recorded. So we're going to get right into the requirements here. So right off the bat here, Clause 7.1.1. The laboratory shall have a procedure for the review, request, tenders, and contracts. The procedure shall ensure that, first line A, the requirements are adequately defined, documented, and understood. So we have two shalls there. So as we know, and in the prefix of the standard, a shall constitutes a requirement. So shall have a procedure. So you should have somewhere in your 17025 quality management system a procedure documenting how this is achieved within your organization, something that tells you how it's done. And your procedure, and we're going to go through a list of items here, should address these various items that we're going to go through here. And so you shall ensure in A, the requirements are adequately defined, documented, and understood. So in other words, I I have down in here. There shouldn't be any gray areas. If anything is presented to you as a laboratory, if you're not sure or it's not real clear, perhaps some more clarification would be needed on your customer's end until you do completely understand their requirements and the scope of work which they are requesting. The procedure shall ensure, moving right along here, that the laboratory have the capabilities and resources to meet the customer's requirements. So of course, yes, you have to ensure you have the tools to do the job. If this is something that is being done under your scope of accreditation, perhaps you would need to assure that you have the range covered to cover the specified work. Also, perhaps your customer has specific requirements as far as a statement of compliance, tolerances. Do you have a small enough? Are you able to achieve the required uncertainty to determine whether or not the customer's artifacts, say, perhaps is within a specific tolerance? So you have that capabilities based on your range and scope for, excuse me, your range and your CMC, that if the work is coming under your scope of accreditation. So of course you have to assure that you have the capabilities and resources to meet the customer's requirements. This is all prior to agreeing to the work. The procedure shall ensure where external providers are used, the requirements of 6.6, which is the section on externally provided products and services, i.e. purchasing, are applied, and the laboratory advises the customer of the specific laboratory activities to be performed by the external provider and gains the customer's approval. So if you're not aware, section 6.6 is purchasing, is also subcontracting. So in the realm of 711C, we're talking about subcontracting here. So basically, if you have the need to subcontract, and we're going to go through some notes here in a little bit that may you may not now, but you may have the need to subcontract in the future, or perhaps you do occasionally subcontract. Under 6.6, you have to evaluate and approve your subcontractors. Have to have some sort of criteria in place for approving anybody to do subcontracting on your behalf. And then it's not just something that you can just do. The standard requires that before you subcontract anything, that you gain the customer's approval. That's the gist of 711C. Just copy some notes here. These are all within the standard. Of course, notes are not requirements. These are just for clarification or further information here. So we have a note one, which basically it is recognized that externally provided laboratories activities can occur if the laboratory has resources and competence to perform the activities. However, for unforeseen reasons, is unable to undertake these in full or part. So perhaps you have a key piece of equipment that's gone down. You're unable to, at that time, perform a request from a customer. However, you may be able to subcontract it, provided that they met the requirements in 6.6 and your customer agrees to it. And I may need to subcontract if there's a circumstances that arose that the laboratory does not have the resources or competence at the particular time to perform the activity. So often laboratories may not just have a policy, blanket policy. They do not subcontract. However, just bear in mind there may be situations that could arise that may prompt the need to subcontract. So just bear in mind that these requirements are captured within 6.6 and 7.1 if situation warrants it. The procedure shall ensure that the appropriate methods or procedures are selected and are capable of meeting the customer's requirements. So it's like, again, that's something that any responsible lab would be doing anyway. One thing I like to sort of stress in this area is if your customers are coming to you as a 17025 testing calibration facility, they know you're accredited, and they look at you as being the experts, and that you would be selecting the appropriate procedure. Perhaps you're doing a specific calibration on CMMs, dimensional calipers, micrometers type of calibrations, which they are not versed in calibration and procedures. Hence, they go to an accredited source, which will sort of solidify that the lab will they are the experts, and they will be selecting the appropriate procedure, and which will meet the customer's requirements. We have a second note here. So this is for internal. So if say you're a calibration or testing lab within a larger organization and you're just doing work for your own organization, that will be internal. Or routine customers. Perhaps you have some folks that you have been in place for a very long time and have a agreement that's been in place for a very long time. This is basically stating that this can be performed in a simplified way. If it's all stated out in front somewhere in history, and it's just been continued agreed to as the years go by without interrupting, that would be considered a routine customer. And this process would not have to be repeated every time they send a artifact or a sample, artifact to calibrate or a sample into to be tested. Might be a situation where the customer may specify a method. So if this is the case, and if the method is considered to be inappropriate or out of date, the laboratory shall inform the customer of this. So an example of this, sort of try to depict here, are ASTM standards that are withdrawn or discontinued. It's not appropriate to use those methods. Perhaps they've been superseded by an updated method. So if for whatever reason, if this does occur, you're expected to inform the customer and perhaps educate them that the method being proposed is, whatever the case may be, out of date, withdrawn, discontinued. All right, 713. So this is the big change when the standard was was revised in 2017. So the requirement here is when the customer requests a statement of conformity to a specification or standard for the test or calibration, such as a pass-fail statement, intolerance, out-of-tolerance statement, the specification or standard and the decision rule shall be clearly defined unless inherited in the requested specifications or standard. The decision rule selected shall be communicated to and agreed with the customer. So if you're not in tune with what we're referring to here when we say a decision rule, that is a definition within 17025. It's a rule that describes how measurement uncertainty will be accounted for when stating conformity with a specification. So as stated here under 713, this is whenever you say something passes, something fails, you're making a statement of conformity to a specification or a tolerance. So this is stating here that somewhere along this request tenders and contracts protocol, you have to communicate to your customer what your decision rule is, or perhaps even have your customer specify what decision rule they would require if they're versed in this and may have their own internal requirements for decision rules. So just to clarify a little bit more what we're talking about here, sort of depicting here. Here we have various scenarios where we have a value which is specified by the dark area between the two lines there with the end rods at the end there. So that's the value, and those end rods are what I'll say is the gray area or the uncertainty. So if you're stating a pass or a fail, if, for example, if both the the value and the uncertainty is totally within the tolerance and does not cross over the specification limit, then you could safely say it passes. Or if the recorded value and the uncertainty are both clearly outside the specifications, and that's a cleared fail. Whereas a gray area is those instances where the value may be within the spec or outside the spec. However, if you take uncertainty into account, it may not present a clear case of a pass or a fail. So what the standard requires you to do here is let your customer know how you're taking the uncertainty into account. So typically, if you're a calibration lab and if you are guard banding against this, so you won't state something clearly passes and fails, a valid decision rule may be accounting for the uncertainty will take to mean that at a 95% confidence level, the measurable result plus and minus the expanded uncertainty at k=2 shall be totally within the specification limits, and the risk of false acceptance or rejection will be no greater than 2.5%, which is a typical decision rule if you are guard banding against a 95% confidence, a 95% confidence interval there at a k=2. So that is just one decision rule. Decision rules can run more strict, could be very loose to something referred to as simple acceptance, where recorded values are based on, pass fail is based on recorded values only without taking measurement uncertainty into account. I see this being utilized a lot. Again, that's acceptable if your customer sees it, agrees to it, it fits the customer's needs, and they're willing to take that risk of false acceptance, which in the case of a simple acceptance could be up to 50%. So for additional guidance on this decision rule, and I have done webinars on here, if you want some additional information, feel free to go back and listen to those recordings. Also, their ILAC has a guidance document, very good, guidelines on the reporting of compliance with specifications, which is ILAC G8. So as far as the requirement under 713, customer needs to be aware and need to agree to the decision rule. So that needs to be presented up front. Could be on a quote, could be on the contract, because something that sort of that would show that the customer did see it and has agreed to it, is the gist of this requirement. All right, moving on. 714, any differences between the request or tender and the contract shall be resolved before laboratory activities commence. Each contract shall be acceptable both to the lab and the customers. Any deviation requested by the customer shall not impact the integrity of the laboratory or the validity of the results. 715, the customer shall be informed of any deviation from the contract. So if anything has changed from the initial agreement, customer needs to be informed of that. If after work, so that was prior to work commencing, 716 addresses after it has commenced. If a contract is amended after work has commenced, the contract review shall be repeated and any amendments shall be communicated to all affected personnel. So again, what this is stating is the process would have to repeat itself. Sure, you have the capabilities, you're meeting the customer requirements. Everything that we spoke to up to this point would have to be repeated if something has changed after work has commenced. 717, the laboratory shall cooperate with customers or their representatives in clarifying the customer's request and in monitoring the laboratory's performance in relation to the work performed. Going hand in hand with good customer service there as well. Such cooperation, again, some notes, providing reasonable access to relevant areas of the laboratory or witness calibration or customer-specific laboratory activities. Perhaps customers would like to come in, see your lab, perhaps maybe witness how calibrations are done, how their standards or samples are handled. Maybe instances where this cooperation can include preparation, packaging, or dispatch of items needed by the customer for any verification purposes. Okay, so you're required to have a procedure, which was the first requirement in here. And like I said, a procedure is specifying how it's done. 718 is stating that you are required to have records. So a record is showing that it's been done. So under 718, any record of reviews, including any significant changes, shall be retained. Record shall be retained of pertinent discussions with the customer relating to the customer's requirement or the results of the laboratory activities. So if I'm doing an assessment, for example, I'm looking at perhaps in my case, a calibration report, and I see the customer, can very well should be able to see the record. Let me see the record of this agreement, what's in place. If there's statement of compliance in place, show me where the decision rule is. Show me where the customer has agreed to this. So bear in mind, a procedure is required, along with maintaining the record supporting the procedure has been followed. All right, so this is the end of today's presentation. So once again, I'm going to give me a second here. If any questions come to mind concerning what we just gone over. Bear with me, I have a little trouble opening up my tab here. Folks, I seem to be having some technical difficulties opening up the question tab here. Which is a first.
Hey, Mike, I can go ahead and read them to you if you'd like. I've got it open here on my computer.
Okay, that would be fine.
Sure.
Sorry about that. Okay, go ahead.
Sure. If the supplier subcontractor is considered proprietary to the lab, what is the minimal information that must be provided to the customer?
Basically, the customer just needs to be made aware of that the work is being subcontracted as far as the requirements of 17025. So beyond there, as far as 17025, that's all that's required. the customer is assuming that you are accredited. There are requirements for you approving and approving your subcontractors. So that would be sort of in with the territory of 17025 that would be done. But as far as the requirements, no, you don't have to release any of that information. As far as what's stated in 17025, just that you need to make them aware that the work would be subcontracted.
Okay, and we've got for decision rules in a testing lab that works with bacteria, is it appropriate to say that a detection limit is our decision rule used?
I'm a calibration person, so I am not versed in that area of testing. Oftentimes with testing, the decision rule is specified within the method, how measurement uncertainty is accounted for when you're making a statement of compliance, and it may be very well in your particular test, saying that and I'm sorry, what was the statement concerning the detection limits?
I actually removed a question from my list, so
Yeah, it stated something about the decision rule is within the detection limits. If it makes sense to the customer, that would mean you would probably have a detection limits is the smallest amount of a particle that you can read. So just thinking about that, I'm just I just don't understand how uncertainty would even fit into that. That your uncertainty is going to be beyond something that you could even read. So I would have to say I would default to your procedure and see if it's addressed within the testing protocol there. Okay.
Okay, then next I've got two parts to this one. One, please explain the graph for the decision rule. And then two, please give an example of how the decision rule is applied in providing a response to a customer. That is a statement in which the application of the decision rule is included.
Okay, again, I got all this covered in a previous webinar. That's a whole lot there under the decision rule. How is it communicated to the customer? I believe was part of that question. Like I stated, during the contract review process, the customer has to be made aware of and have to agree to the decision rule. So that could be as simple as a quote, or perhaps a contract if it's something long term, explaining the decision rule. Again, this is when you're making a statement that complies, pass, fail, intolerance, out of tolerance. And I did give a graph earlier here, and I'm gonna see if I can go back in time here. And unfortunately, I don't think you can see my little arrows here. Can you see my arrow moving by any chance? I guess not.
Yeah, we do see your cursor there.
Okay, this value here, you see where I'm pointing? That is the recorded value. So you're stating in calibration, if say it's a test weight, this test weight is 5.00031 grams is an example. That's the value. This gray area is the uncertainty. So you always have an uncertainty. By definition, measurements are not traceable without an associated uncertainty. And you can see you have a value with that crossing over the spec limit there. So that's what we're talking about. We just can't clearly say it passes in that particular case, and it may not pass because of uncertainty. So you need to let your customer basically know how you're accounting for making a statement of compliance. Are you just going to say that this passes based on recorded value only? There is a decision rule that says you can. Are you going to guard band against the 5%? If uncertainty is K equals 2, your customer would just need to be aware of that guard banding, which will alert them that you're not going to say that in this particular case, if you are guard banding, that's going to be a clear pass. That would be identified as perhaps an asterisk that would say taking uncertainty into account. In this particular example, may actually produce an as found failure. Or before we revised our PL3, and you can still use that. We used to, not required, as guidance, you could specify this not as a clear pass or fail, or perhaps as a pass indeterminate in that particular case.
Okay, our next one.
Certainly.
Sure. If no decision rule is selected, simple pass/fail, uncertainty is not considered, and customer agrees to it in the contract review process, is the lab compliant?
Yes, that is called simple acceptance. Again, the lab has to take on the responsibility. Is that going to meet the customer's needs? So you need to know what your uncertainty is, and is it going to be so big that it's going to make any sort of pass/fail determination meaningless. But however, if all those align up, and if and it's called simple acceptance, and this is defined in the ILAC G8 document, taking measurement in statements to compliance is based on recorded value only without taking measurement uncertainty into account. And you need to also take into account the risk of false acceptance or false rejection. And in the case of simple acceptance, that could be up to 50%. So if it's right on the line, it could go either way. Just as long as your customer is aware of that and they agree to it, that would be fine. Just be looking for where that was communicated to and agreed to up in front by the customer. I'm sorry.
Okay, and then I have one final one that is split into a couple parts. It says, our blanket statement is that we don't subcontract, but that would only be for work that's under our scope of accreditation. Is that okay?
Yeah, in the realm of 17025, that's what we're referring to as subcontracting, is work under your scope of accreditation. Subcontracting is something that's not done on a permanent basis. So a blanket statement like that would be fine. If something happens, like I said, perhaps unforeseen circumstances, equipment goes out, key personnel for whatever reason are no longer with you, then you may need to revert back on that if something was to change. So I don't see anything wrong with that blanket statement, and it is in conjunction with the in 17025, in conjunction with the work under your scope of accreditation.
Okay, that seems to be it for the questions today.
All righty. Again, I don't know what's going on. I'll have to talk to you about it, Christian, offline here sometimes. I did something a little different here, which is not allowing me to drag this question tab here, and I see a little space here. So I did something accidentally. But before we go, and thank you for jumping in for that. Next month. So yeah, we're gonna have to wait till all the way at the end of March 31st, which is a Thursday. We're going to look at section 7.8, which is a reporting of the results. We're going to go through those requirements. That is an area that's specific to all three: testing, calibration, and then also sampling. Also decision rules. So we mentioned in 7.1.3 here, it has to be agreed to by the customer on their contract review. Reporting the results is also required to be documented all in your reports if you're making a statement of compliance. So again, thanks for everyone for joining in, and mark your calendars for March 31st. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.